everybody. Glad to see you all again. And I wanted to just introduce Kaethe just by saying that Kaethe and I have been friends for, I can't remember, 54 years, something like that. A very long time. That's just because we're old. And we met when we were young. But anyway, it's just really great to have you here. And I know we're going to learn a lot. So thank you for being here. And I'll let you do the other introductions. Let me know if I can do anything to help you.
Okay, thanks. Corky and I actually fell in love at first sight across a very crowded room. And we made a beeline for each other to be in a small group, a dyad with each other. And that was, 54 years ago. That's right.
And it was a bread and
Roses
meeting, which was a women's consciousness raising organizational meeting. All right, that's the history.
Okay, so it's a little bit about me. I did teach at the Family Institute of Cambridge for years, and I am currently the director of the Witness to Witness program at Migrant Clinicians Network, which means I'm doing work that's really quite different from the work I'm going to be talking about with you today. So I'm starting with who I am, because this is part and parcel or inextricably connected to the work I'm going to be presenting. So I've been married for also 54 years, not to Corky. And I've spent 35 of those years, or 65%, as a married person dealing with cancer or its aftermath. And in 2008, my husband was diagnosed with cancer. So 14 of those 35 years, that's 40%. I've also been the partner of a man living with cancer. I'm the mother of a married daughter with cancer. And I'm the daughter of a mother who died in an era when patients were not told their prognosis. So I've really closely observed the marriage of partners who concealed the truth and, importantly, their truths from each other. I've worked for decades with couples, both socially and clinically, dealing with cancer and other forms of illness. And in my immediate family, we've had experience with 8 types of cancer, and those have been at different life cycle stages. And finally, I've served on the UCSF Helen Diller Family Comprehensive Cancer Care Family Patient Advisory Council for the last 10 years. So to manage my care, I need supplies that fill actually more than one, but at least 100-liter capacity bin. So that's also something about my embodied experience. And now I'm going to get, believe it or not, even more personal, because I find that often people are in their own minds forming a question like, well, how do you do it? And I think the answer is, and there are probably many answers, and I would give different ones at different times, but I really have worked very hard to understand and overcome the traumas of the multiple illness experiences that have surrounded me and been in my body, and also to understand the impact of the 21 operations I've had to date. I also became a writer, and I've been writing about illness since 1991. And I will have Corky or Liz distribute a reading list that I've put together. And I've developed a motto, which has been, really centering and important to me, which is to turn private pain into public purpose. And I've also accepted the constraints of my life by making gratitude almost, I would say, an an hour by hour on some days, not all days, but a figural and not a background awareness. So it's a picture of me, and those of you who are in the know may recognize that the white kind of, no, I can't even remember the name. I had it for 9 months, but the bandaging on my, what was it, left, in that odd, I can't see, arm is from a PICC line. And I use myself because I am in the categories of the people I see and discuss. And for me, that's a political decision. And other people have characterized it in a variety of ways, including feminist, postmodern, and autoethnography. But for me, it's really about the politics of my life and the politics of lived experience in this particular body-mind constellation that I am. So in general, how well anybody is able to live with the body they have depends on effects, and everywhere that's mediated by luck and social circumstance. And I am very keenly aware of that. Illness, as you may imagine and know, doesn't make marriage easier. It accentuates the flaws and it challenges the strengths. And then this quote is very important to me and at times quite central to my experience. I have never met a lonelier person than someone suffering with pain. So this is an outline of the topics I'm going to cover, or I hope I'm going to be able to cover all of them. And if not, you'll have a PDF of the slides. And so you'll get to read this material. So this is a really important point. This particular slide talks about disparities in cancer care, but it would also be true even though the literature is not as accessible and available in terms of illness, mostly because it's spread across so many different illness categories. But for every marginalized population, there are disparities that have to do with the kind of care that people are going to get. And it has to do with what clinical trials are available, who has access to high quality care. There are all kinds of adverse social determinants that add to cancer risks and poor outcomes for people who are diagnosed with cancer. And I might say many, many other illnesses. At Migrant Clinicians Network, we're particularly focused on diabetes, and this absolutely holds true for diabetes. So the witnessing model, some of you, if you know my work, know that this is a model that I've been working with for the last 30 years. And I'm going to kind of pose a question, and just in terms of time, what I'd like to do is to pose these two questions and have you, if you have access to the chat, just put in a word or a couple of words, a phrase into the chat in response to the questions, and I'll ask them. What has it been like for you when you have been truly witnessed? That is, when somebody has listened to you with compassion. And if you can just put in, a word or two into the chat, and then if somebody, Corky or Liz, if you could read what some of the words are that are coming in.
See if I can. So, wow. Relief, liberating, connecting, healing, soothing, deeply seen and held, affirming, held, loved, profoundly comforting, validating, grounding, a relief, a great relief, healing, validating and hopeful. I feel loved, calmed down.
Great. They're mostly positive. And then the second one, and Corky, if you just read 2 or 3, that'll be great. What has it been like for you when you have fully witnessed someone else?
So they're coming in like powerful, empowering, honored, humbling, connected.
Okay. So when I began presenting the model to healthcare workers in large national webinars, when there were 200, 300, 400 people on the webinars, invariably the responses, as it has been here, to the first question, all of the words were positive. But when I posed the second question, we got quite a range. And one of the things that we realized, and I'm sure you will too, that if you are witnessing fully 8, 10, 12 hours a day on a shift, at a certain point, it's no longer a magical experience. It can be exhausting. It can be people tune out. People need to manage themselves in a variety of ways. So this model, we're going to look at this particular image in a couple of ways. But the first way, I'm going to ask you to look at it from the perspective of you as a provider, as a clinician, as a healthcare worker with people. So it's the color scheme is based on a traffic light, and all of us want to be in that green square. We want to feel effective and competent, and that comes from being aware of what it is we're privy to, we're witnessing, and we feel empowered in relation to it. But far and away, and not just in the context of COVID, I've been presenting this model for the last, 30 plus years, 35 years in different parts of the world. People really describe in one way or another that they feel very aware of what it is that they're witnessing and pretty clear about what's needed in the context or situation that they're in, but they often feel under-resourced and therefore disempowered. And the under-resourcing can range from, so in the beginning of the pandemic, feeling under-resourced meant they didn't have PPE, but it can also be that a skill set is needed or a perspective or research evidence and you don't have it. So in that yellow square, people will feel ineffectual, stressed, and exhausted. And in the main, when we're looking at rates of healthcare workers leaving the profession, and in some surveys that's as much as 50%, what we're really looking at is people who are in that yellow square, and they're absolutely exhausted. And part of that exhaustion does come from the fact that witnessing and being present to people suffering hour after hour, and not just in a 45-minute or a 50-minute hour, but in a 50-minute hour, they may be connecting with 10 patients and then patient families. It can be very stressful and draining. Now, these other two squares we're going to look at in a moment from a kind of a different angle. So one of the things that is really important is that none of us, we're not born into a witness position, and they are always situational. And our witness positions can actually change interaction by interaction. So I might feel during one part of a conversation, I might feel aware and empowered, that is in the green square, but then something else happens in the conversation. And in fact, that may happen to me today doing the interview. I may feel disempowered in some way, like I don't really know what to say or how to respond. So now I'm going to sort of flip the positions here and think about it from the perspective of a couple, where one member of the couple does have an illness and the partner is in a witness position. So again, from the perspective now of the couple, they want to feel that that there's mutual support. And when people are in that aware and empowered position with each other in the context of illness, it's likely that they are going to have repeated intimate interactions that will produce a feeling or experience of intimacy. But oftentimes, the partner feels unsettled or unsure, and they also may be frightened for what the ill person is going through. They may feel helpless, demoralized. And so the couple may find themselves, or one person in the couple may actually be in that yellow square. One of the more, or two of the more kind of complicated and difficult positions in relation to couples where illness is a primary concern is when inadvertently, because most people don't choose to be in that red square, they are actually unaware of what's needed, but they're empowered because they're well, because they have resources, because they have energy that the ill person might not have. And so they respond in a way, or they offer suggestions that actually are experienced as not supportive, as intrusive, as misguided. And then when you look at the bottom right square, it is also the case that sometimes the partner just can't really bear what they do in fact know, and they move into a position of denial, and they avoid, and they feel numb. And so the person who's ill has an experience of essentially being abandoned. And all four of these positions are ones that clinicians I routinely see and work with. So now I'm going to kind of complexify, like, how easy it is it for the clinician to know how to work with a couple, especially when one person's assessment of where they are in this, let's say this image, the diagram, is different from the other person. So let's see if I can make this work.
It's just, there's all this pressure, and sometimes it feels like it's right up on me, and I can just feel it, like literally feel it in my head, and it's relentless. And I don't know if it's going to stop. I mean, that's the thing that scares me the most, is that I don't know if it's ever going to stop.
Yeah. Well, you do have a nail in your head.
It is not about the nail.
Are you sure? Because, I mean, I'll bet if we got that out of there.
Stop trying to fix it.
No, I'm not trying to fix it. I'm just pointing out that maybe the nail is causing.
You always do this. You always try to fix things when what I really need is for you to just listen.
See, I don't think that is what you need. I think what you need is to get the nail
I'm
out.
not even listening now.
Okay, fine. I will listen. Fine.
It's just, sometimes it's like, there's this achy, I don't know what it is. And I'm not sleeping very well at all. And all my sweaters are snagged. I mean, all of them.
That sounds really hard.
It is. Thank you. Ow!
Oh, come on. If you would just
Don't.
try to see things.
So hopefully you're laughing at this point, and there's some experience of familiarity, because the model is not so self-evident and easy to use in a clinical setting. what we are trying to do as clinicians is help people who are in that square of feeling aware but disempowered, like, what do I do? Move into the aware and empowered position and not kind of escape into either square 2 or square 3. So just a tiny little bit of research findings. It turns out, and there's no surprise to you, that alignment and misalignment and misattunement are highly problematic. Misattunement is associated with distress, and it's not the absolute level of or quality of relationship that matters. It's really the perception of alignment that matters. And of course, in that couple that we just saw, there was not a perception of alignment. I use this kind of model because these are terms that many people use for the caregiver. One of the things that obviously is really important is that they too are having an empathic stress reaction. And then I think it's also really important to note that, and if you look at this graph, it was really not until the 90s that the concept that in the context of illness, either the person who was ill or the person who was the witness might have a trauma experience related to some aspect of the unfolding of the illness experience, both dependent and independent of interactions with medical care. So now I'm going to talk about another topic, which I've written a lot about. And in the context of COVID, I would say that this idea of self-loss, which I'm going to talk about in a moment, has really struck a chord. I did a webinar last week, and we do get on the evaluations, we do get comments on what was helpful, what was not helpful. The majority of the comments that we got on this webinar were about how useful this idea of self-loss was to people. This was a webinar on the impact of long COVID on families. So ambiguous loss is a concept that was developed by Dr. Pauline Boss. And the idea here, and there are two kinds, I'm not really trying to make a distinction between the two forms of ambiguous loss, but kind of providing this very generic description that the person is there, but they're not the person they used to be. And I do think that the idea of ambiguous loss applying to this in the context of illness can be very helpful for people. Chronic sorrow is a normal and non-pathological state of pervasive, continuing, periodic, and resurgent sadness related to the ongoing losses associated with illness and disability. So Ruth started writing about this in 2002. I picked up on this idea. I think my first paper on chronic sorrow is in 2010. And again, people seem to resonate. The word sorrow is such a beautiful word. It's kind of helpful to use a beautiful word when you're talking about something that's really a painful experience. And then this idea of self-loss. And this, again, I think this comes from the 2010 paper, that people who live with a painful gap between who they have been and who they are now, of who they dreamt themselves to be and who they still long to be, are living with self-loss. But the partners of people with illness have a corresponding experience of self-loss, because not only do they perceive the diminishment of their loved one, and they have to cope with feelings of loss of the person that they had known. But they endure self-loss in many ways because they can't go about and do all of the things that they had done with their partner. And since illness diminishes the self of each member of the couple, clearly in different ways, how does each person keep from falling out of love with oneself and the other? And I think that's really a key dynamic in many marriages where one or both people are ill. And it's a dynamic that's often very both central and difficult to talk about. It does show up in the arena of intimacy. And here again, I mean, it may be very hard to get into the nitty-gritty, the detail, the embodied lived experience of ways that with self-loss, other loss, forms of intimacy change. And sometimes things that were really highly valued are just not available any longer. This is just one figure that looks at 4 stages of people trying to put together an intimate life. And I've in red, I've put down this film. It's really old, but if you can find it, I think it's a really beautiful evocation of a couple trying to make sense of the losses, including the losses of intimacy. Social support. So research is really, really clear, and hopefully all of you are very aware of the research base that shows that the clinical outcomes are way better when individuals have social support. And actually the influence of social relationships on risk for mortality is comparable with other well-established risk factors for mortality, like how your cardiovascular health. But it turns out, and many of you may know this very well, that it's not so easy to get the kind of social support that people want. So people can be kind, they can be thoughtful, well-meaning, clueless in any combination. I happened to just read an hour before we started class, an article in the New Yorker, in the Atlantic, and unfortunately I don't remember the name, but it's going to be in this issue, about how difficult it was for friends and family members of the man who was writing the article to find words to support him after he and his wife had a terrible, tragic loss, which I'll leave at that. So yes, people struggle with what to say and how to help. And when friends and family get it wrong, even though you know that they're well-intended, it's painful. And it's another thing to cope with. And of course, COVID has made it much more complicated emotionally and pragmatically to get social support. I was talking with a young couple, the wife or the woman in the couple was getting chemotherapy, and they had made a plan to go away for a weekend, and her partner's parents came down with COVID. And even though it had been 2 weeks prior, the woman who was on chemotherapy was immunocompromised and didn't feel safe. So again, there are complicated emotional and pragmatic reasons why getting the right kind of social support can be very challenging. So again, I mean, if you are the friend of a couple who are having challenges dealing with illness, you want to be attuned and thoughtful and helpful, and you don't want to be critical and hurtful and cruel, but inadvertently it could happen. And often people just feel confused and uncertain and inept. And in point of fact, that article that I mentioned, which is based on a book, is apparently all about how people can be attuned, thoughtful, and helpful. And the title of the book is essentially, Don't Say, I Cannot Find the Words. So again, in terms of social support, in many phases of illness, couples just don't have a large enough pool of friendship and family resources to help them. Or there can be misalignment between the couple of who wants and doesn't want to involve outside people. And there are many reasons to reject help. I'm sort of noticing time and I want to be respectful of that. And again, you're going to get the slides. Yeah, they can be misaligned with regard to how people offer or provide support. In other words, one member of the couple may feel really good about what a neighbor is offering, and the other person may find it, really doesn't fit.
Okay, to go till quarter of.
Oh, okay, thank you. So again, the poignancy of COVID for couples dealing with serious illness, this is something that's come up over and over again, that if you are in a immunocompromised couple situation or family, you had to know the COVID case rates, and you had to be clear that you had supplies of rapid tests. And if they had disappeared in your local pharmacy, you had to know exactly where you could get them if you needed it. And your friends were continuing to go to movies or go to restaurants indoors. And it made many people who were in that situation where they were in isolation angry and resentful and stressed and even depressed. So let's just look for a moment at phases of illness. And the models of the witnessing, self-loss, other loss, social support varies by phases of illness. And these are terms that medical practitioners often use, but they're not the lived experience. I think it's chaos. And then during treatment periods, it can be awful and disgusting. And then people have a continuum of coping or not coping. And then reality hits for one, both, or neither, like this isn't going away, or this is much harder than I thought it was going to be. And then there's dying. And then there's the aftermath, after death. And at any of these points, and these are not, these are not exact moments in time. There can be what we all call big T traumas or little T traumas. And in the context of little T traumas, there can be many a day. And that also is exhausting and really drains energy that people need to just deal with the logistics of illness, let alone the pain and suffering. So here again, there can be miscommunication, and that may be what shows up in your office. There can be miscommunication between providers and the patient or the couple. Often I see that there can be wildly different approaches of partners regarding communication with the medical team. And then, as I mentioned before, there are really specific issues at the intersection of COVID, long COVID, and current treatment that often that is exactly what's being brought to the clinician who's working with a couple where there's one member, or sometimes sadly both, who are dealing with illness. Medical errors is something we don't really talk about very much, and yet it is a third leading cause of death in the United States. They're vastly underreported for a variety of reasons. And yet a disclosure handled well will often prevent litigation as well as, and key, mitigate harm. And finally, I do think a form of medical error that's hardly ever addressed is abandonment of providers at the end of life. It's, to my mind, a really central form of medical error that's almost never even put into language. Moral injury happens when, from any of these positions, the ill person, the partner, the provider, you witness a failure to care or an interaction that caused harm, and you felt powerless to address it directly. And that happens over and over and over again in the context of illness. Jonathan Shea's work is really important in this regard because he adds an important layer, and that is the feeling of being betrayed. That is a violation of one's sense of what's right by somebody who really has authority and should know better. So now I'm going to turn kind of pretty quickly, and hopefully some of what I'm going to be talking about very quickly, you'll see in the interview, maybe, we'll see. So a core concept for me is the idea of reasonable hope, because it directs our attention to what's within reach more than what is hypothetical, what's desired, but probably out of reach. It's relational. It's a practice. It maintains that the future is open. It's uncertain, but it can be influenced. And I will have to say that when my husband was diagnosed with cancer, this was, or maybe I developed it because I desperately needed this idea that we just didn't know. And that was actually our best bet, that we just didn't know what the future was going to hold. Reasonable hope accommodates doubt, contradictions, and despair. And it really does try to identify goals and pathways to them, because I think, in fact, when you're ill, when you're part of a couple where there's illness, having clarity about something you can do is really important. So we say hope is a verb. It's something that we do with others. So yeah, the research tells us, and my life says, yes, you should consider working with couples. So I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. Some of the things that people can do to orient themselves to working with couples where there's illness. First, I think, and foremost, is to develop your own insights into reasonable hope, because more than anything, that's what couples need. But I think it's also really important to ground yourself in your own embodied experience. And for me, having had a year of chemotherapy, and then right after I had a flu, I would rather have chemotherapy any day than a case of flu. So if you've ever had flu, if you can get back into that mindset, you'll have, that is one of the ways of grounding yourself in an embodied sense of what it's like to feel absolutely awful. You can read first-person accounts of people dealing with cancer or other illnesses. I think it's important, at least for moments, to really deeply understand the terror of mortality and the experience of pain, to practice embodied listening and cultural humility, to really be clear about the resources that are necessary to build so that your empathy doesn't become the pathway through which you yourself get injured, to build resources of self-compassion. You know, there are just some things you cannot know. to recognize moral injury, and to build up the muscle for tolerating grief. Really important at some point in sessions, and often if a couple comes into you and they're in crisis because of an illness, you kind of skip over the part of getting to know them prior to their being in a relationship where they were dealing with illness. But I think that that's really key. So here is a list, and we're going to go through them pretty quickly. So the bottom line is you can never really know what's happening inside a marriage, and hopefully all of us know that by now. But it turns out neither can the partners, and this is a book that's kind of a good example of that. Working with reasonable hope, as I say, I think is really important, and especially inserting the future by helping them live with uncertainty. That's I have a whole article that I wrote with our daughter about the importance of the therapist inserting the future, because you don't know whether there's actually going to be a future or not. I think identifying people's witnessing positions, but not saying, oh, you're in square number 2 now, and you really want to be in square number 1, or that comment was horrible, that was square number 2. You want to help people find ways of moving into that green square. Important to listen for self-loss, other loss. And again, considering trauma that is so underrepresented in the literature, in clinical dialogue, and then helping people develop a plan to address it, and if necessary, have them consult with their medical team to see whether medication is indicated, or meditation, or physical exercise. Encourage the acceptance of support. They're just such clear benefits, and if necessary, to negotiate compromises. I think it's really important, as I say, to develop the muscle of being sturdy in relation to their grief, and to recognize that the goal isn't to work through grief. That doesn't happen. People work with grief, as will you. Discuss how they feel about their medical team. And I always take a history of medical errors. It's important to really move in and disrupt dysfunctional dynamics, not just between the couple, although of course that will be accessible to you, but also between the couple and their medical team. Listen for metaphors. Hopefully everybody does this, but there are some metaphors that couples, any couple, but certainly in the context of illness, use that are really not going to serve them. And it's important to be able to point them out and suggest alternatives. And at the end of life, it is important to be gentle, but also to be bold and kind and as specific as possible. And then I also think I'm a political activist in every cell of my body. Will the couple be served by joining with patient advocacy groups? And will you be served by aligning with a political advocacy group? And then I will conclude, and I think I'm going to almost hit the exact time mark. Every moment of being alive can be a moment of feeling gratitude and awe. And these moments are always available as a counterweight to those sorrows beyond that which is ordained. So that's what I wanted to share.
Thank you, Kaethe. That was really beautiful. And meaningful and poignant and interesting and stimulating. We're gonna not discuss it now, as you know.
Can I just ask, what was the book? There was a book.
Yeah, there
I'll
was a
send
tiny, what?
I'll send that, that'll be part of the reading list. I'll send
Okay.
that out.
So we're going to take a break. Everybody's going to have their 15-minute break and be back exactly at 8 o'clock. And the role players will come on with Kaethe. What would you like, 5 minutes to meet people, Kaethe, before the role play starts?
Do you mean meet everybody in the group?
No, for you to meet the role players before the role play starts. During the break, they can come on for 5 minutes and you can just say hello if you want to, but you don't have to.
I'd like to meet, no, I'd like the start to be the start.
Okay, very good. So we'll have everybody come back at 8 o'clock for the start. All right, we'll see you at 8.
So when you get a chance, if you can just stop sharing the screen.
Mhm.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so I guess this is a little technical thing. You're little tiny squares, and I had thought that you were going to be, large.
On my screen, we are,
Are you on
all-
gallery
Please do.
view? Do you have gallery view, Kaethe?
I was just told to do show non-video participants, so.
No, you want to not show non-video participants.
You want to hide non-video participants.
I did that.
So click on,
Oh, okay, got it. I can do
now
both.
can you just see 3 big people?
I can see 2 because I
Oh,
want to.
you don't see yourself. Okay, perfect.
No.
Okay.
Okay, so,
okay, all right.
all right. Jill, Mark, hi, I'm Kaethe.
Hi.
And I guess, one place that I always start, especially in the context of knowing that one of you is somebody who is living in an uncomfortable body, is just to ask you whether you are going to be comfortable the way you're seated, where your lighting is for 40 minutes, because 40 minutes, if you have an uncomfortable body, can be tough. So let me just check in about that.
Thank you for asking that. I'm fine.
And I'm
Okay.
fine as well. It would be more for Jill.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so I'm learning this way also, that Jill, you are the person who's at the moment, because who knows what happens to any of us,
Right,
Um,
right.
who's dealing with discomfort.
Yes. for
let's
sure.
Start exactly there, but maybe you could start by, this is our first time that we're meeting together, and, maybe you've met with many other people, but I would really like to hear what it is that, has impelled you to meet with a clinician at this moment in your lives. If if we could start there.
Well, I initiated the contact. We know of your reputation and thought that you could be of some help to us. We're having a lot of difficulty in terms of connecting and understanding each other. I'm a psychotherapist, and I've dealt with people, helping them, and I'm feeling pretty frustrated in terms of what I'm offering is not working, and I know that it's difficult for Jill as well, and so I figured we needed some help in bridging the misunderstandings and difficulties that we've been having with what Jill has been dealing with, which has changed so much in our long relationship, full and vibrant marriage with children, grown children. It's very different now.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. there's so many pieces, and if you don't mind, rather than my responding to the many pieces that I have heard, if I could turn to Jill, so I kind of get a sense also of the timing of that. Would that be okay with you, Mark?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so Jill, help me understand from your perspective why this timing worked out for you, or you were willing to come with Mark.
Well, it's been a couple of years since I started having symptoms. And I feel like Mark has resisted knowing what's going on with me all along. He has a view that I'm depressed. And certainly my illness is depressing, but that's not the primary problem. The primary problem is that I have, well, my illness sort of started and stopped. It's really finally been vaguely described as an autoimmune disorder, but nobody has been able to put more specific language to it. But what I experience is that I am sort of in this like bubble of aloneness, because no one seems to really understand what is wrong with me. But I know it's not just depression. I know that's not the primary problem. The primary problem is that I have this indescribable fatigue. Just, I don't even think people know what it's like to feel as fatigued as I do most of the time. And, you know, I have different bodily symptoms. Sometimes I have headaches, or I'm, you know, nauseated or whatever, but the worst of it is that I am so exhausted, I feel like I can't get out of bed most of the time. And
So if I could just, you know, again, both of you have just offered me such rich descriptions in the opening minutes of our conversation. So one of the things that I need to do sometimes is sort of slow things down, and so that I'm not going to get overwhelmed and miss nuances that are really important that you want to communicate. So although I said to you, Mark, that I wasn't going to respond directly, there are a couple of things that Jill has said that I want to be sure I am hearing correctly. So I'm not going to ask you the name of what has been offered, because it sounds like that there's some ambiguity or lack of clarity, and in some ways something, you know, there's been a basket category, autoimmune, but something that's not necessarily really specific and helpful to you. But I hear you saying something about the physical part, which is overwhelming fatigue, but you also used this phrase, a bubble of loneliness, and the sense that, you know, a bubble is often a very fragile membrane, but it sounds like inside that bubble there's something actually quite strong, and it almost like can't be penetrated. So I am kind of wondering, Mark, when you hear a description of a bubble of loneliness, does that resonate for you only as a description of what Jill has told you her experience is, or does it also resonate for you as having some, you know, make some sense for what you experience as well as her partner?
It's an interesting question. Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty lonely. I'm pretty lonely, and it must be lonely in the bubble. Yeah, yeah, we're not connected as we once were for a very long time, and so there's this disconnect, loneliness. I don't feel in a bubble, have an active life in many ways, but it doesn't feel as fragile as kind of the metaphor of a bubble that's a thin membrane, as you put it. But I think what's in common is that we're maybe both kind of lonely, our home life.
Lonely, and is there a sense also, and again, one of the, I would say for me, dilemmas of Zoom is that it's really hard for me to actually see your bodies in space. I can see, from what, here up, I actually can't see whether you're contacting each other. I just can't see that on the Zoom. So I guess I'm wondering whether, Mark, you said you have a very active, rich life still, but the life with Jill is really different. And whether that, the loneliness, are you ever both inside a loneliness, sharing that feeling of, wishing to have a connection with each other, and it's sad that you don't? Or are those pretty individual experiences of what it's like not any longer to have the rich connection that you had?
The way you put it, maybe not so much in terms of sharing. I'm afraid I've been accused of being rather prescriptive and even pushy at times in terms of wanting to help Jill, but it's not received very well. And but I don't know that we've really talked about things in a more, I guess, vulnerable level of our loneliness. No, I don't know what you would say, Jill.
Yeah, what about for you, Jill? Does the idea, or, I'm it's not really an idea, it's a wondering on my part about whether you ever feel, Mark, either entering inside your bubble of loneliness, or whether the two of you sometimes talk with each other about each feeling lonely, and a kind of a nostalgic loneliness, like not just alone now, but a nostalgia about maybe how things were before.
I think the problem is that I think Mark is very well-meaning. I know this has got to be very tough for him, but, I basically feel like he just doesn't understand. We have a basic misunderstanding or misattunement between us about what's the root of the problem. I mean, Mark, you would agree, wouldn't you, that you've sort of gotten stuck on the idea of antidepressants as a cure?
Well, at least something to try. But we've certainly gone the routes of trying to get some definitive answer to what's going on, and it's so the uncertainty is so uncomfortable. So, I mean, why not try whatever there is to try?
So
It's kind of
let's pause there for a moment, because I suspect that that's a conversation you've had with each other. Try antidepressants. No, that's not where it's at. So I suspect that if I were to ask you more about that, we would be in territory that you've been in with each other and it hasn't been super productive. So I'm going to put that aside and let you know, okay, I heard that. But I guess I am kind of wondering, maybe I'll start with you, Jill. If out of this conversation, if there were one experience that you have that would be like the key for you, the core that you would want Mark to come away out of this conversation really getting, that you would have, okay, this is different. I feel seen. I feel known,
yes.
even if it's a moment of knowing, being
Yeah.
known. What
Thank
is
you.
it?
Thank you.
Is it,
That's so helpful.
is it possible to kind of verbalize what would make you, even just for a moment, feel known? Because I suspect, Mark, that that's something you would deeply cherish her having with you, a feeling that you are open-hearted to know her, even if it's a moment.
Absolutely.
So,
Let's just even, just sometimes I, at least in my own experience, when I'm about to put words onto something, if I make myself stop, pause, and really take the time to check in with my body, even if it's a hurting body. So I'm going to ask, all of us just to kind of be in a pause, to be quiet for a moment and kind of see all of the places where we can get information that might be, helpful to us going forward, that we're going to want to use language for. So, we're going to actually take a moment. It's going to feel really long. A moment of silence can, but, let's try. So you both looked up. So I'm going to use that as a imperfect, but nonetheless a cue that, we can start. And Jill, I'm going to ask if you could start.
Mark, it would be very hard for you to know me, because this is not the me I know.
Mm.
I don't recognize this person, and I don't even like her. I don't like her. She feels needy and ashamed and alone, because, I have consulted with many people, but all they can say is, gee, we don't really understand what's wrong with you exactly. And I don't understand either, but I can tell you that I feel useless. I feel like I'm not the self I was. You know me from before. I used to be full of energy and excitement about life and interesting. I think I used to be interesting. I'm not now. My mind is a blank. It's like they talk about brain fog. Well, I feel like I have nothing but brain fog. And almost no energy. And I just can't, I don't like me. I don't even want you to have to deal with me, to be honest. I feel like, how could that be anything for you except a terrible burden? And I know that the medications I have tried don't work. So I don't feel any hope about this. I don't know where it's going. I don't know how long it'll last. I don't know if it'll ever end. And why should you have to live with this person? I almost want to offer you a divorce. I don't want a divorce, by the way. I don't want one, but I just don't know how. I know I'm sort of like a big nobody right now.
So maybe we would take that as a phrase. I'm sort of a big nobody right now. And would it be fair to say that that kind of crystallizes what you would want Mark to really, really get about what it's like?
Yes.
I'm
Yes.
sort of a big nobody right now.
Yeah.
So the temptation, Mark, is to say, no, you're not. I love
I
you.
know,
I
yeah, exactly. Yes, yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to scaffold you because, it's human, right? It's human when you hear that from the person you love to go, no, but she's actually asking, and you have permission, right, to join her in something that must be so challenging for you. To join her. And again, it may not ever happen outside of this conversation, but she's really extended an invitation to you. Please hear me. Believe me. This in every cell of my being. This is what I feel like. I'm a big nothing.
Yes.
So as an invitation to you, Mark, not directed to me, but directed to your dear Jill.
Yes, yeah. Well, Jill, I it's kind of a portal to understand something that maybe I was blinded from just wanting to help, which is just kind of my role in life. But I missed the profound depth of what you were just talking about in terms of you're not happy with the experience of, just your experience. It's not who you are. It's limited who you are, and it's awful for you.
Thank you.
I don't
Thank
like
you.
the state either, but it's awful for you. And
And I feel like it's awful for you, and I don't know what to do with that.
So let's not go there yet.
Okay.
Let's not go into a solution space. Let's
Okay.
see, as hard as it is, and I got teary, Jill, when you were speaking. It's really moving, isn't it, Mark? When somebody is that clear about how changed, altered, crummy, bad, nothing they feel. So what is that like? Now I'm going to sort of switch and say, what is it like for you to join her there, even for a moment? What is that like for you?
I want to, and it felt good for a minute there, but I'm scared. I'm scared, honestly, because there's been so much tension and so much kind of rejection of my efforts that I don't want to step in it again. So I isolate myself some. I try, and then I'm not getting it. I do want to understand, and it did feel good for that moment because we weren't fighting each other.
Did you feel in that moment that Jill was open to you or receptive, that you weren't being rejected?
Yes, yeah. I felt she was open to me. Yeah.
And again, I don't want to, I guess I am going to put words in your mouth, but there's something about her being open to you that kind of transcends the difficulty of being together, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So there's something about that, and you use the word vulnerable, that kind of being vulnerable together, as hard as it is to be vulnerable and as difficult as the actual vulnerabilities are, there is something about sharing them, connecting.
Yeah.
And again, you can't live your life in this moment of connection. Nobody can live pragmatically in this space, but just to know it can happen. There can be moments of
Yeah.
connectedness.
In some ways, my own needs don't seem very important. I think I feel most useful when I can make a difference, and I do for many people, but not at home. And so there's that feeling of inadequacy, and also I miss you, Jill. I miss Jill terribly in terms of all the things we would do, active things, just be together and enjoying one another. That's really been severely reduced.
Right.
And
You
I
miss
miss it.
Jill. Jill misses
Pardon?
Jill, right?
That's right. That's what I was just gonna say, that I miss me too. But if when you can hear that and just let it be, it helps me be more accepting of this new me who never imagined anything like this ever happening to me.
Yeah, most of us don't kind of grow up going, oh, I know just what it's going to be like. And I know just how to prepare for, I know just how to practice for being a person who can't do anything. So, I think, as a person myself who has had periods of not being able to do anything, from that place, I do know that that's a kind of a totalizing description, that even in moments of great pain and exhaustion, there are some things that can be done in some ways of sharing. So again, not to enter a solution space, but for me to know a little bit about whether there are things that the two of you have discovered, because often it is a process of discovery of what you can do together that, isn't going for a walk or, isn't going to a concert, but does create moments or experiences of being together. So over the 2 years, have there been ways that you figured out, yeah, we can do this, and it does feel together?
Well, I guess for me, what's been best has been the times we've watched a movie together.
Yeah, that's just what I was thinking, a series or something.
Really, yeah.
Mhm.
That, and then we could, hold hands.
And you say you can hold hands. Is that ever and we do hold hands?
And
Not so
once in a
much.
while,
Not so much.
yes, yes.
So once in a while. Yeah.
And again, I don't mean this to get into the weeds here, but how do you have a conversation about what you're going to watch? How does that go?
Well, I usually initiate it, and I guess as things have gotten increasingly more frustrating and I guess physically worse for Jill, that it's happened less and less. And often things are on later, or just because of my schedule, it is later. And she doesn't. You don't stay up. She doesn't stay up, and so it happens less. But it is. But I guess as I think about it, the timing of it could be better. It could be more negotiated. I guess I initiate things. I initiate it, but maybe it's not always the best timing, or maybe even the programming. I'm not sure.
So I know, a lot of times when people are well, they have dinner and then they watch something and then it ends at 9, 10 o'clock at night. And by then, that's midnight, in the middle of the night, perhaps for you, Jill. So, have you experimented with you come home from work and you start watching a movie at 5, so earlier in the day or something like that? Has that been part of your discovery with each other?
No, it's not a bad idea. Yeah, we could do more discovery in that way, and I guess we could negotiate it better. I think out of my own frustration, my own irritation, my own anger, I have to admit. I think the nature of the interaction has been pretty conflictual, or just turning away from one another. And I think we can do better.
So Jill, you had your hand up for a moment like that.
Oh, I just was feeling so sad, but grateful.
Say something more about that. Sad but grateful, meaning?
There's been so much loss for both of us. But I'm really grateful for this opening that seems to be happening in this conversation.
Hmm.
I'm grateful.
One of the things that does often happen is that, especially I think with couples who have had a rich connection, the kind of making do with something that's so clearly not as good as is just really hard to accept. And yet these things that are, you use the word negotiated and somebody else might say compromise, but if you kind of get into your head that actually you're entering an adventure with each other. And I don't mean, believe me, to be Pollyanna, but there is something about the discovery of what is possible inside these really delimited spheres. It's creative. It can be connecting. It can be hilarious, right? I'm sure you've had experiences where, you tried and something was awful, but sometimes things that are like awful and you both realize they're awful are kind of wonderful because you just realized together, So I guess maybe also because you said you were having, a twinge, a feeling of gratitude. Maybe you are people who are ready to kind of embark on some adventures together of, what's doable in this really altered reality. And again, sort of circling back to something that you said, Jill, you are living in an uncertainty. And it's not going to get more certain, right? So, how do any of us, first of all, certainty is a delusion for all of us, but for some of us, we bump up against it more often than, others, and others do in other times. So right now, the two of you are living inside uncertainty, and you're having to really, I think, develop a capacity, right? For tolerating uncertainty and not moving into clarity, not moving into certainty, like it's always going to be dreadful. That's one certainty. It doesn't sound like the two of you move into the certainty of it's getting better every day, it's going to be fine. It doesn't sound like that's, the particular certainty you move to. But, there's something to be said for living with more clarity about uncertainty, which is actually what we all live with. I mean, to be.
I hear the wisdom of that. I do. Thank you.
So I'm just noticing time. We have about 5 minutes left. And again, I mean, I really want us, especially because this is so much about our bodies. Let's just take another moment. And I know that it's often very long. A moment is long, but let's just all sort of check in with each other. And then I'm going to ask how this conversation has gone for you. And we'll just take a deep breath with each other. But let's just take a moment and really check in with each other, with ourselves, then with each other. Mark, how about you?
Yeah, I'm having a mixed feelings. I'm feeling kind of guilty, badly, that in my efforts to help, I may have made things really worse, and it's become part of a pattern, interactional between the two of us. We bounce off of one another, and when I took that breath, my body relaxed, because I see a hopeful possibility that to not do so much, and for Jill, I want to apologize to you, Jill, for my pushing, well-intended, and you're realizing that. I appreciate that my intention, but intention isn't everything, and that it's just understanding that you don't like what's happening anymore, but in a very different way than I am. And that maybe something we can do together may not be kayaking or this or that, or long walks, but it's joining together in I guess the uncertainty of it, and also the reality of it, even if it's missing some things. That's something that we can do together. And I think that was opened up by your skillful restraint, Kaethe, of our getting into the weeds or the details of it. It's maybe not so complicated for us to find some way to be together. I hope we can do that.
So if you hadn't heard what Mark said, and if you are now going to kind of begin from what you checked in with yourself about, what would you want him to know? Me to know, us to know?
Well, there are two parts to this. One is that I want to say the most, that they're almost equally important. I guess I need to do it differently, Kaethe. I need to say to Mark, I really appreciate your apology. I really, really do. And I'm sorry you're having to live with this, but what you said, Kaethe, about uncertainty is the most helpful thing I've heard today or any day, because if we can really embrace that that's the way it is, and that's work to do, but we can stay with it. We can really embrace that. Maybe I could feel better about me, and I certainly already feel better about you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Really, thank you. This is my life. This is my life too.
It shows.
Take good care.
Thank you so much.
You too.
You too. Yeah.
So you know what happens next. Oh, Corky comes on.
I come on, and the thing that I am very interested in, you both were very much in your characters, but can you name a moment, Jill and Mark, when you felt a shift? Something that opened up for you, for yourself, within yourself or toward each other, or was there something that Kaethe said or did? Can you remember? I know you were very in it.
Well, I guess from the very beginning, I felt Kaethe's willingness to accept and help us accept what has happened. And that was just huge, because no one's ever done that before. Ever, 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 ever.
The level of acceptance of the situation and all
Yeah.
the facets of that.
And for me, the moment was when there was just the most kind and gentle, yet firm, holding me to really listening to what Jill was saying and her experience. And Kaethe, you were not going to allow me to go other places. And I noticed you did that with Jill as well. So it was very balanced. It felt very balanced, very understanding, but there was a focus on, where's the vulnerability? Where's the sensitivity? Where can we join together in a softer place than whatever it is that we've been doing, that there wasn't permission really to go there, but without scolding or without strong arming, but in a very kind way. I don't need to hear the details, but I do want to know how the two of you can be connected. And I didn't want to resist that. I mean, I could have told a lot of stories, but I didn't.
And Jill, do you have any other thoughts before we switch gears here? Anything else you want to say about moments or?
Well, I guess what I really want to say is that I was really originally volunteered to role play this because of my relationship to Corky, but the truth is that it was such a privilege to work, even in an imaginary way, to work with you, Kaethe. You just are, it is your life, and you have a mastery of that and a comfort internally with that is you know, a model for all of us. So it was a privilege to do it.
I agree. A privilege and an honor. An honor. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I feel the same way. It's a privilege and an honor to watch. The things that struck me were when you said, when Kaethe said to you, what would make you feel seen? That felt like a moment when you said, oh, wow, you know, this is really something. And then the other moment that really struck me, and again, there's many, was just this notion of, can you be with each other with this, and not get into doing. And then this capacity for uncertainty and living with uncertainty, which you named, Jill, in the session as so important to you.
Yep.
So those are just things that I wanted to name at this point, before everybody goes into their small groups.
Can I say something about that, or is that not the right time?
You say something, whatever you want to say now is fine.
Just that I have a lot of credibility when I talk about uncertainty. And not every therapist can have the credibility that I have.
Yeah.
And virtually everybody who comes to see me already knows that. I mean, I did say a lot. I mean, I was disclosing, not in detail, but I disclosed enough so that if it happened, that the person didn't come in knowing that. But I am aware that young therapists starting out really can't really work uncertainty the way I can work it in a session and have the credibility that I have. Then it becomes an abstraction, right? And the very nature of uncertainty that we're talking about is really cellular.
Living with it in your own body, your family, your relationships, your future, your moment to moment. Yeah. Well, so what we're going to do now is Liz is going to put everybody, do you need everybody back on before you put everybody in groups?
Yeah, I
Liz?
need people to turn their videos on. And some people, a couple people, I turn them off. So you may not be able to turn them on, and I'm just going to have to, if there's anybody who can't turn their video on, just let me know and I can fix it.
So you want people to speak if they can't turn on their video?
Yeah, if they can't turn their video on, just let me know. Kara. Okay, where? Oh, I have to stop hiding so I can see you. Show non-video participants. Where? Oh, geez. I'm looking for Kara so I can turn her video back on, and I can't find her.
Liz,
Mhm.
can I give you some Zoom advice to just look in the
Oh, in the
participants,
participant list. Yeah.
and then you can just search for her.
Yeah, got it.
And you can do it there.
Okay.
And Bridget
thank you.
also is not.
Right. Yeah, I don't see my
Yeah,
video.
it's because we don't have to go into the details. Okay, so anybody else need help? Let's see.
You can all turn it back to show non-video participants if you want to. But now Liz is going to put you back in your original groups.
Yeah, and for people who are late, I'm just going to put you into groups with some other folks. So I'm going to put everybody into their groups, and then whoever was late, I'll pop you into some groups. Right now, I'm going to start it.
So welcome back. Just a few opening remarks. One is that, this is an opportunity to talk to Kaethe about what she did. It's not about your cases, and it's not about why didn't you do this or that, but what she did do. And you can raise your mechanical hand under reactions, and that'll send you to the top left of the screen, and that'll be easy for Kaethe to see who's got a comment. And Kaethe, you might be willing to start with the description of the arc of the interview, and then you had said some comments about your interest in hearing from people. So I welcome you to start with that.
Yeah, no, it's kind of a throwaway, but when you do a PowerPoint and then you do the interview, that's the stuff I already know. What I don't know is what you're curious about, right? And then I get to learn that, and then I also get to learn what I think about what you're curious about, which I don't know. So this is the part that's exciting for me. And in addition to the interview, which was genuinely moving for me, and I don't see Jill and Mark, but it's just really touching.
They're here.
And yeah, I said something about, the kind of, there is an arc to the interview, and I'm curious whether other people saw that arc. That's number one. And number two, I do feel that there are lots of things that I do that are meta comments that structure and contain the movement of the interview. And so I'm also curious about whether that's visible to other people. And then I'm curious what what any kinds of curiosities you have, but I don't see any mechanical hands.
Okay, so now you're open to put your hand up.
Beth.
Hi there, that was wonderful. Our group really loved that. Thank you so much. We were just talking a little bit about your beautiful use of using that moment of quiet. And we were sort of wondering how you, that you didn't just use it once, you used it twice. And so we were just curious about the architecture of the session, how you decided when to use it. And if you could just talk a little bit about your use of that technique. Thank you.
Well, as a technique, I also said twice, I'm going to slow this down. Beth disappeared. I guess when you took your hand down, you disappeared on me. In general, I really do like to slow down interviews, or frankly, any conversation. And one way of doing it is the verbal way. I say, let's just slow this down for a moment. And the other is, and when you're working with people where there's illness, there's a huge amount of information that people are not observing if there aren't moments of silence. So, that technique is to be sure that in the conversation, in the flow, we're getting all the information that's there. Our bodies speak, that's that book, the body, what is it? The body knows the score, but the body speaks. So, I need to know, and I want people to know themselves what the body is speaking, because it does.
So do you use it in almost every session?
I always slow sessions down. If people have been working with me for a while, then they do it automatically, so I don't need to. And the last few years, most of my work has been in translation. So, and it's on Zoom. So that is automatically slowing things down, right? And it's it's very productive, at least for me, when things are slow.
Thank you.
Annie. But I don't hear you because you're muted.
Hi, Kaethe. It's so wonderful to learn from you again. It hasn't been 54 years, but it's been
Oh, it's a lot.
it's been 40 years, and you really got me started on this path of being a family and couples therapist, and it's just such a joy to be in that position again, learning from you. And this was a gorgeous interview, and the role players were magnificent. I mean, it was so moving. I have many places of entry that I'd like to ask you about, but I guess I'm going to limit it just to one question, which is something you mentioned in the PowerPoint, which was the use of metaphor and the listening for metaphors that aren't helpful and then offering ones that are. And I saw you do that. You picked up on the metaphor of the bubble of loneliness, which I think you felt was helpful, and there was a place to kind of amplify it or play with it, or and then I felt like you added your own metaphor of adventure within the very narrow constraint of that illness can bring. And I wondered if you would just riff a little bit on what kind of metaphors you think are constricting or damaging, and sort of how you make those judgments about them.
You know, to give you an example of a metaphor that's damaging is almost to say that I'm going to traumatize everybody, right? I have an array of, like a little, it's not so little, a box of metaphors that have been offered both by couples and by providers that are really awful. And so I do listen really carefully for metaphors. And that one, the bubble of loneliness, I switched it out, right? And then Mark also switched it out. He talked about a membrane, and there were numbers of ways that moved.
Yes.
Right. What I was hoping wouldn't happen is if you have an image of a soap bubble and you're thinking about putting each bubble of loneliness together, you don't want it to pop, right? That would be a location where that metaphor would be problematic, and that didn't happen. The one about adventure, I actually think that I was really kind of in the metaphor of, this is a country where you really haven't explored together much. You're fighting being in this country so hard that you're not aware of all of the possibilities inside this country.
Mm-hmm.
It is, there are discoveries to be had, there are adventures to be had, and there's a lot of humor here.
Mm-hmm.
My husband, I was having some cognitive issues. It turned out to be medication related, and I was in bed going, oh my God, I'm losing my mind. And my husband, who has cancer, said, well, that's the good news, because you won't remember I'm dead, which struck us as completely hilarious, right? If you pay attention to the content there, is not so hilarious. If you pay attention to where are those moments of connection, well, that was a profound one,
Mm-hmm.
right? We're acknowledging, yeah, he's going to die, right? I mean, he hasn't, but he will. So does that answer?
Yes.
Uh, Luana?
you.
Did I say it right?
Hi, yes, you did. First of all, thank you so much. This was such a beautiful role play to watch, and it really just felt like sitting in on a real live session. It was so powerful. I had a question that was similar or related to the first person who spoke, related to those moments of silence. And in the breakout room I was in, we talked about ways that you were inviting the couple really to slow down and to be in a more mindful place, like to drop down into themselves, but not in a way where you were explicitly inviting them to check in with their bodies, which of course can be very tricky and possibly triggering, right? If there's chronic pain, and things like that. So I was just wondering about inviting clients into that place where they can slow down, and do you ever touch their experience of their body? Like, how do you think about bringing mindfulness or embodiment to the session? Because in this session, it seemed to me like you got at the regulation, you got at body slowing down, going from a place of things feeling really fast, maybe we should just separate, we're stuck, to I'm sure their heart rates went down, I'm sure they were in a more kind of regulated place, but there was never mention of body, right? So I'd love to hear you just talk about that for a minute.
So I'm a little surprised, and because I felt like I was talking about bodies a lot. And so it's fascinating to me that it didn't come across that way. And maybe Jill and Mark would be able to comment on that, whether they experienced me providing an invitation for them to access, I think I said information from their bodies. I felt like that was a phrase that I used both times. I invited us to be quiet. So I do think that even if people check in and touch into the physical sensations they have, even if those sensations are pain, that if there's language for that, and if they notice there isn't language for that, all of that is entirely usable. It would be entirely usable for me as the clinician. And I'm also checking in with my body, which is a body in pain. And I have to, be with where my body is in space. 40 minutes is, maybe this is a 3-hour chunk, but let's say I don't do a 90-minute interview in this particular body of mine. That's not doable. So I do feel like I am inviting people to, but I don't know, maybe this isn't in the format, but I'm just wondering whether Mark or Jill could say whether or not they felt invited to actually touch into their body.
Absolutely. When Katie, you invited us to take a moment, there was something about looking down. There was something about taking that breath, and it was a visceral experience that my shoulders relaxed, and I was able to get in touch with what the feeling and also the language, the awareness that went with that it kind of crystallized something that I could then share afterwards, which I was grateful for. It was very much slowing down, and then a lot of the static and other aspects disappeared. was the tone of your voice. It was the direction. It was that we're all looking down, including you. And then it was as much time as needed, even though maybe at the end we were maybe running out of time. That was okay. And then we looked up and you were waiting till we were ready. So there was something very, it was a deeper dive in the middle of the session. And very much a body experience felt.
So I don't know if maybe it would, I really want to hear from, I'm sorry, I'm not seeing the other person in the role play, so I want to make room for her to also answer. But I just wanted to
sure.
clarify a little bit. I mean, I was
I
very,
don't know how to get back to, oh, there I am.
oh, there you are. I was just going to say very briefly, I was very aware of the check-in at the very beginning of the role play of how does it feel to kind of be in this for 40 minutes. And I was aware that there was a dropping into the body with the exercise, but I may have missed part of the prompt. My headset was acting up for a couple of moments. So if I missed it, I apologize. But what I remembered was an explicit prompt around like what it would mean to be heard or to hear. And my sense was that what was being explicitly asked for was, I think what someone in my group called it was like a head and heart, but not an explicit invitation to like notice the breath or notice the body. That's what I meant is, and again, maybe I missed it, but I don't remember an explicit body prompt, even though it was a very embodied session. But I'd love to hear.
I think
Yeah.
there were 2 explicit prompts at when I suggested the literal moment of silence to see, discern what information was also coming from the body. And the one that you were talking about was earlier, and it was not connected with the moment of silence. But Jill, maybe you can.
Sure. Oops, did I do that? Is that right? Can you
You're
hear me?
okay. You're good.
Okay. So I totally got what you were doing, and I just put it off.
No, we can hear you.
You can hear me. I can't see anybody though. Let me just. Sorry.
Well,
Okay, never mind. Anyway, what I was going to say is that I find that actually is a very almost essential way in my own work with people of bringing people into their inner lives, their bodies, because I think many people are unaware of how disconnected they actually are from what they're experiencing rather than what they're thinking. So I found it helpful, and I got what you were doing. It was useful. Definitely.
Is that an okay stopping point, Luana?
Yeah, that's fine. I don't need to take more time. I think what has been clarified for me, which has been really helpful, is that you don't shy away at all from explicitly checking in about what, like if there is pain or whatever comes up. I just know that mindfulness with the body can be tricky and is really important, but can also be triggering. And so that was where my question came from. But it was helpful for you to clarify so explicitly that not only are you open, but that you are very invested in checking in with the body. So thank you.
And I do want to circle back and say that I can absolutely affirm that there are times when getting information from the body will erupt. I mean, what will get verbalized is a dysregulation, a trauma response, and I'm okay with any of that. I do feel very practiced in those moments, and were they to happen, which they did not in this interview, but they might, and I would be fine. I mean, I'm unhappy for the person, but I would be fine in terms of not, oh my God, what am I going to do? I would not have that feeling.
Yeah,
Marianne, you have your,
thank you.
lovely to see you too. And you're
You got to unmute, Mariana. Unmute.
I just can't believe this experience. After so many years, it's certainly my privilege to see you again and to hear you speak. And I think of all the times that, that we've had conversations and how present you were. And once again, you were incredibly present for this interview and for all of us. So, just to see you is a privilege. The question that I had came up in the small group, and then other people in the group also commented, but I started to say to everyone, that to the other members of our small group, that I was really caught by your comment. I have a lot of credibility for holding uncertainty. And to me, that was very, very important and meaningful to me as a therapist, but it would be important for me to know that any therapist that I was seeing would also be able to say that. So the issue, though, as we discussed that particular phrase, was what is the difference between uncertainty and certainty and credibility? And then we threw in humility and power and control. So those are all words that people use in terms of defining both themselves as therapists, but also themselves as a patient. So I was struck by the fact that Jill was really talking about her own credibility in terms of saying something that nobody else could actually accept or believe. And so she was trying to get out a sense, to others that she was credible. But on the same hand, you, Kaethe, as the therapist, were saying that you have a lot of credibility for holding uncertainty. So it.
But I just to be clear, I said that after the interview was over, right?
Of course,
I was
yes.
commenting kind of to us as a group that
Yes.
That what I was able to do as a 25-year-old clinician, even with a small medical history at that time,
Yes.
is really different from what I can do as a 76-year-old with a gigantic medical history that, people know about. So that I meant, I have that kind of credibility.
Yes, of course. And we understood that, but still, it was pertinent to the session itself. Because
yeah, for sure. I mean, because one of the things that is, I think, most challenging about illness is to live inside that space where you don't know what the future is.
Yes.
You can be given a prognosis and it's still going to unfold in a way you cannot know, right? And
yes.
So helping people see uncertainty, and this, I guess, harkens back to Annie's question about the metaphor, as for most people, this is uncharted territory, and what they really need is accompaniment, right? Accompaniment in this country of uncertainty. It is not the same as the country of illness. It's not Susan Sontag's metaphor. It's something different. This is a time, space, right? It's not it's not the geography of our mind. It's about time. And it's vast. This is a completely vast terrain, and you have to, well, not you have to, people really do better if they're accompanied.
Yes.
Clinicians don't accompany well, medical people don't accompany well in this location. So some of us, have somebody's wonderful cat. Wow, am I right? Is that a cat? Not a monkey? Um, you know, so yeah, and in terms of power and control, I think I'm kind of a dullard here because I would not imagine that anybody would have much to analyze in this interview along the dimensions of power and control. I could be wrong.
Absolutely. Yep.
I don't think there was much to observe in the domain of power and control.
No, it was, in fact, that was the beauty of it. But what was very enlightening to me to watch you, kid, was that you could convey the sense of credibility without actually saying credibility. And to me, that was very unique. And it's also difficult to express how you would convey credibility. You could say and do things in which you lead someone to believe that uncertainty exists and that you're accompanying someone who has a fear of uncertainty or questions uncertainty, but that you accept it. And I guess that's the credibility part, that you can accept.
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine Mark and Jill can speak to this, but I think I can convey a great deal of comfort when I offer uncertainty as a vast opportunity. I think I'm going to pause there.
Yeah, I have a thought about, I have a reflection about this. From my perspective, in addition to people knowing and you sharing about your own illness story, I think it's part of it to me is your insider knowledge. There's a lot of things that you knew at a body level that many clinicians would have to ask to understand. They would have to, you kind of just short circuited. You didn't have to ask them a lot of questions to understand their positions because of your deep knowledge of the landscape. And so I think that that's a connected, to me, is a connected thing.
But I'm going to interrupt for a moment, if I may, because I did say something very explicitly in the very beginning. I asked them both whether they would be comfortable where they were, given their bodies, and I did not know which one was ill for a 5-minute interview. That flag, that's a neon sign, right? That's a neon sign coming from me to them that I get something.
Exactly.
Right.
Right. Yeah, I think exactly. And yeah, I think there's a lot of insider knowledge that helps you to know what's going on more quickly than other people would, in addition to having credibility with the clients. So I think to me, they're two tracks that blend beautifully.
So, Kaethe, at this point, it seems to me that one thing I would like for you to do is to describe the arc of the interview. But you said that you had an idea about. Do you still have would you be willing to say what you thought the flow of the interview was?
There's a moment where I am kind of in the first, let's say, the first 40% of the interview. The arc is whether or not these two people can have a moment where something is understood that hadn't been understood before. And I'm preparing that, almost sentence by sentence, interaction by interaction. And it does happen, right? They have a moment where they have an experience of being connected in the pain of what Jill's phrase was. And remember, she has a really long, that's almost a 4 or 5 minute monologue. And fortunately, she supplied the language that I was able to stop her when she says, I am sort of a big nothing, right? So we have this phrase, you can imagine that it's a metaphor, or you can imagine that it's literal. And I don't move that. But what I do know is this is a moment now, we have language where Mark is either going to communicate that he gets it or not. Either way, it'll be fine from an interviewer's point of view. Either way, we learn something. As it happens, she feels, and I mean, I say she feels, you felt, because you told us, you felt understood in that moment. So now something has happened in the interview that they have told me hasn't happened much or at all recently. So now they have an experience that's new to them. And I know that there's reasonable hope, right? Something has happened. I know that there is something that we can build to. So I do a little bit of what for me is a little bit sloppier than I would like, which there was a section where I'm asking them kind of what they do, what they don't do. And then we go back into a moment of silence, because for me, there was a little bit of raggedness that, you know, it wasn't, it felt too kind of like daily. It wasn't enough of you know, we're in a conversation with each other that only the three of us could ever have. There were a few minutes where there was a conversation which I generated that was more like, well, they could have with their adult child, you know, or a good friend. So I'm trying really hard not to have any of those kinds of moments, minutes, even, you know, seconds in the interview. And then we're moving into territory that kind of arose, and it was about, you know, again, I'm using the language of moments, right? Not a day, not an hour even, just a moment. Can there be a moment of, you know, connection? And then they tell me about the films. And then here's a place where I do something very concrete, which again, it's not my preference, but I snuck it in about, you know, well, what would happen if you saw that movie at 5 o'clock rather than, you know, you have dinner and then a movie because she's asleep. And then we're kind of heading from that kind of connectedness into what turns out to be, but to do that is to enter into the vulnerability, uncertainty. And now we're in a conversation I know they're not having with other people. And they're certainly not having it with her medical providers. And then that opens up again. And if we had had longer, it would have been, I think, a really, I think they really, I mean, I say they, I think the two of you would have really been interested with me. I think we could have gotten this almost a feeling of jazziness about an adventure, you know, discovery, territory, land. So it had that kind of structure to it, in my view.
Yeah, thank you for describing it. I also was very interested in your meta speak, and I know we only have a minute, but you know, you make very transparent statements about where you are and what you're going to do and why you're going to do it. Could you say something
And
about
would it be okay if, and I say to Mark, like it opens up that way. He speaks and I say, you know, I've heard a lot and I could, you know, comment on what I've heard, and I can assure you I did, but I'm wanting to hear from Jill right? Those are all these to me, like there's sections, and then, there's the weaving together of the sections is all the places where I'm meta communicating, being transparent, and I'm asking permission. Can we do this? Will it be okay? This is why I'm doing it. I know you've said this, but I'm first of all, it's how I talk in my life, right? I mean, you would know that. So it's not like this is a clinical skill. I mean, it might be, but it isn't discontinuous with how I am in my life, and my grandchildren can do it, right? They can meta communicate. So yeah, I think I feel like I crochet Afghans stitch by stitch, and that's really how I see interviews. Sentence by sentence, it's stitch by stitch, and I don't want to drop a stitch. And in order to not drop the stitch, I need to tell people where I'm going with that next stitch. And will you come along with me?
Yeah,
And
in a
then
way,
people
that-
are coming along with me.
the idea that you're going to tell people the pattern, right, of oh, well, now we're going to go to red, or now we're going to, go to green, or
Is it okay? Is it
It-
okay if I put my stitch in here?
so it's a way of being collaborative at the same time that you're guiding and leading. And by sharing transparently what your thoughts are, you're also creating an amazing sense of we. Like every time you had those moments of silence, you said, we are going to do this together so we can figure out what information we get. And it was, I think that was, I just wanted you to say that out loud, because I think those things are really important for people to consider. Can they do that too? Bring back to your own lives and practices as a beautiful thing to do. So, Kaethe, would you like to have any last word? Because it's time for us to stop, or should we just say thank you, thank you, thank you?
That's fine. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Well, let me just give you a heart, because I feel very appreciative, and I know that I'm not alone, and that this group feels very appreciative of, because it was actually so beautiful for everyone, including the role players, I think. And thank you to the role players. You did, Mark and Jill, you really did a magnificent job of being in that character, and it makes it very special when the person who's interviewing can connect with you in such a genuine way and feels so authentic, and gives the interviewer a chance to really show how they deal with real situations. So I'll see you all again. Yes,
Can I
Kaethe.
just say one more sentence? I
Sure.
should have, the interview maps onto the witnessing model, and it also maps onto self-loss, other loss. It was absolutely present, and I never had to say, oh, Mark, you just told me you were in the red square. Oh, and you really want to be in the green square, but when you enter in that yellow square, you end up I didn't have to do anything, but it's all right. It was all absolutely present in the interview. And without my understanding that model, I wouldn't be able to do the interview as I did.
Yeah, and we'll all have that. You're going to send the PowerPoint to me, and I'm going to send it on to everybody as a PDF. So you all have it. And yes, I see some chats saying, thank you. It was beautiful to watch. And thank you so much. It's wonderful to hear you, Kaethe. So I know that that's a widely experienced response from everyone. So I hope you get to read the chat, Kaethe. And we'll see you all in April for step parenting and step families.
Bye-bye.
Kaethe, read your chat, because you got a lot of responses that are very sweet.
You can save the chat if you